In today's show, we're going to check out an outstanding high school program that's all about being green. And speaking of green, we're going to check on the building project and see how things are coming along. The show starts right after this. Hi, I'm Alan Smith. Welcome to today's show. Now, you may be wondering why I'm bringing this big branch here into my workshop. Well, I want to show you a few simple tips about pruning. Now, this show isn't all about pruning. It's really more about passing information on from one person to the next, making sure that next generation has all the skills they need to be successful. We'll start the show with a popular high school program that encourages students to reach out and get involved in agriculture. Perhaps you've heard of it. It's FFA, or Future Farmers of America. Now, I got to actually attend an FFA event, and let me tell you, this goes far beyond cows and traditional farming. These kids are learning skills about the nursery trade. Not only that, but they're also learning leadership and people skills, which is so important. You've got to see this. It's really inspiring. Now, if you spent any time at all gardening, you know you got to deal with pests. Certainly the little ones like powdery mildew and aphids, but also the big ones like rabbits, groundhogs, deer, etc. Now, when I created my big vegetable garden, which is all organic, I had to come up with some solutions that help keep the critters at bay and allowed their habitat to stay pristine, but at the same time I wanted to keep as much produce for myself as possible. This is where James Messina comes in with his organic animal repellents. He'll join us a little later in the vegetable garden to show us how this stuff works, and trust me, it really works. While we're out at the Garden Home Retreat, we'll stop inside to see the progress on the house. We've employed many types of environmentally friendly solutions, but one that's really getting a lot of attention is the soy foam insulation. We'll tell you about that a little later. And have I got a delicious recipe for you? You won't believe it. So as you can see, we've got a great show lined up for you. Organic pest solutions, insulation made from soybeans, and FFA in Indianapolis, plus pruning tips. Why, it's more fun than you can shake a stick at. See you after the break. Guess what? FFA is 80 years old this year, Future Farmers of America. Now, you may think it's all about raising cattle, but there's so much more going on here. It's pretty exciting. Roger Phelps with Steel tells us about his first experiences with FFA and why he went back to his corporate office and said, hey, we've got to get behind this program.
I mean, this is really the highlight of our year. We love coming out here. You know, it's all about the experience. So whether it's competing on the sawbuck simulator or trying their hand at climbing up the speed climb on the tree, we have over here we have an opportunity for them to compete in, for instance, the engine mechanics and which piston is wrong, what's wrong with it, and so forth. We do that in conjunction with Edison College. So yeah, there's lots of opportunities to say who's the best. An organization like FFA is focusing on sustainability. It's focusing on biodiesel, agri-science. It's focusing on things like proper two-cycle engine maintenance and repair. Those are the kind of industries that we need to have, especially for something like steel with manufacturing outdoor power equipment. All the other sponsors here are doing the same thing. They're focusing on different areas that are needed to help these young people focus on their passion areas. So whether it's cattle judging or whether it's forestry or whether, whatever it is, that's what's needed. Those dollars that come from corporate America are what is helping these young people pursue their passion. And I want to put that challenge out there. We need that.
There's so many different factors that can play into why we choose a certain career path. For instance, these students here are getting a leg up and a little view into an industry that is growing, and that's the green industry or the nursery industry. Here they're studying horticulture and floriculture. Now, Alan, this is a pretty intense environment, isn't it?
It's really pretty amazing what they prepare for and what they perform with while they're in this competition.
FFA is really about a lot more than showing dairy cattle or horses, isn't it?
That is so true. And in fact, even in my time period, I grew up in a town where they had an ag program, an FFA program, and it was just as you describe in there. And I really didn't know anything about it at that time. It wasn't until much later that I got my first exposure actually going to a state FFA convention that I said, this is a group that I want to work with as much as I possibly can.
You know, I think as parents, they should be very excited about having ag education in their high schools, particularly when kids could have an opportunity to go into the field of horticulture or floriculture or some form of the nursery industry.
It also goes another step further that's very important for those students and for the interests of the parents, and that is the fact that when we're dealing with a plant like this, we're learning botany, we're learning basic science. It's the why we do these certain kinds of practices, so they're getting a solid dose of science to go along with what they're learning in preparation for their career.
Nothing says fall more than trees. Some pruning tips up next, plus organic solutions for keeping deer and other pests from turning your garden into their personal buffet. Stay with us. You know, there's so much going on in the fall, like gathering the last blooms of the garden and drying them. And the trees, my goodness, they're just beginning to put on a gorgeous display of color in many parts of the country. I love the maples with their wide range of red to orange colors. And don't forget about dogwood, certainly beautiful in the spring, but the red leaves, well, they're just spectacular. Now, if you love trees like I love trees, it's important for you to know that the fall is a great time of year to plant them. Nurseries have plenty of selection, and you really need to understand that a tree will settle in through the fall and winter. Even though you think the soil temperature is going to get too cold, there's a long period of time from early fall until the really coldest parts of winter set in when you get a lot of root development, which is so important. If you get them planted in the fall and get them in a happy home, they'll burst forth in the spring. Now, speaking of happy homes, I want to talk about my environmentally friendly garden home retreat where we have an all-organic garden. Now, as you might expect, I have to deal with pests. They can be a real problem, and from time to time, I get an expert out there to help me with some solutions. Now, I'm not talking about ordinary pests here. I'm talking about the big guys like deer. Boy, can they eat you out of house and home if you're not careful. James Messina of Messina Wildlife Management told me what makes his method work when it comes to safely ridding the garden of common destructive pests. Now, James, this is one section of my vegetable garden, and you can see that even in the early spring, things are really coming on.
Yep.
But I do have problems with some of my little friends that come out of the woods that enjoy the flavor of these as much as I do.
Yeah, I mean the groundhogs, woodchucks, rabbits, they're going to be in this place unless you do something to keep them out.
Well, we try to do everything organically. So I've used no harsh chemicals in this garden at all. So I think some of the solutions that you're working on that use natural ingredients really are appealing to me because after all, I'm eating this stuff.
And Alan, if it makes you feel any better, you know, we work within all the guidelines of the EPA as well as the Organic Material Review Institute. So everything is actually certified organic.
James, how often should the solution be applied?
About every 30 days, even with regular water, with rainfall, as well as the watering you do in your garden on a daily basis.
Good. Well, thanks for your help.
Hey, our pleasure. Thanks again.
Now there's more ahead. Next, from the soy farm to soy foam. Some innovations in insulation, and a little later, that great tasting recipe. Now you may be wondering what kind of concoction I'm making here, but we'll get to that in just a minute. You know, having a successful garden depends on many things, and one of them is really having the right tools to get the job done right. When it comes to pruning tools, I have a wide range that I draw on. For instance, if I'm cutting tree limbs, I like to use a bow saw like this. It's lightweight, very sharp, and it can cut a sizable limb. In fact, I cut tree limbs that are the size of my wrist or even smaller. Now, shearing is a whole different department. So I love sharp shears like these. They can make clipping a hedge, a snap, and even a lot of fun. And these long-handled loppers are great for snagging some of those limbs that are up there and a little hard to reach. Of course, you've got to have some good secateurs or hand pruners. They're essential, along with a bucket like this. And what I was pouring into this bucket of sand is mineral oil. I've got about a quart of mineral oil that I'm adding to 1.5 gallons of sand. What I do is I just let the oil seep through the sand fully. And this is a great way to store your shears. You just shove them down in the sand like this, and the oil keeps the rust off the metal and keeps them well lubricated. Now, out at the Garden Home Retreat, where we have an environmentally friendly house and garden building project, some of the methods we're using are tried and true, like this standing seam metal roof. There's no doubt that when it's installed properly, these roofs can last up to 100 years or more. Now, some of the items we're trying have been around for a long time, like a rainwater harvesting system we've installed. We've also had the good fortune of running into some real innovators in their fields, like bio-based soy foam insulation. Now, these guys aren't just making good insulation, they're also using a sustainable product that's good for the environment and the economy. You see, 96% of the foam comes from agrol derived from soybeans and supports more than 600,000 U.S. soybean farmers annually. Help me understand all the various steps that you have to go through to apply this product, because it's different than other kinds of insulation.
It's quite a procedure. We actually bring in a big rig, like I said, as close as you get to the house. They bring the hoses in, they prep the house, they do some caulking in between the studs. They cover all the windows to make sure that there's no overspray that gets on the windows.
Yeah, that wouldn't be good.
Everything's covered, as well as yourself.
So how tight does it actually make a structure? I mean, this is the little studio that we have here at the Garden Home Retreat, and I can already tell a difference, and you're only half done here.
That's right. You want to get it as tight as possible. It keeps things cold just as it should be and hot as it should be.
If you use insulation that's this efficient, you really need to make sure that your ventilation system works, because you're not going to have the benefits of the wind blowing through the house.
That's right. You want to make sure that you're working with an HVAC contractor, a GC, a general contractor that actually is very familiar with working with spray foam insulation, because it's all a team. It just works as a system.
The International Master Gardeners Conference was recently held in my hometown. What a colossal event. Many local gardeners, such as Fritz and Connie Hollenberg, opened up their gardens for them. We first visited their garden back in the winter. You know, this is a great time to get the idea of the bones or the framework of a landscape or a garden. The style of their home has a strong Cape Cod influence, and you can see this with the shingles that make up the siding of the house. Then, as the days became longer and warmer weather set in, the garden came alive. Throughout this woodland garden, the Hollenbergs have placed arbors, which serve as handsome visual focal points. And the containers that remained empty throughout the winter months were brimming again, full of splashes of color. Connie Hollenberg commented on how she and Fritz have changed the types of plants that they grow now that they're retired, and now that their garden is nearly 40 years old.
We've gone from one phase of having lots of roses and lots of upkeep to now, as we're getting older, we have cut back on the number of roses and are only using roses that don't need to be sprayed. We don't use any chemicals or pesticides in the garden now. And we're gradually replacing higher maintenance things with lower maintenance things like shrubs.
After the break, this sumptuous recipe and more. Today's show is about teaching green. So to stay with this theme, we have Chef Faith Anaya with Kids Cook. And she's in the kitchen with a couple of her students, Cecily and Parker, to prepare a delicious and easy recipe. Check this out.
Well, good morning. Today we're going to do a really easy, fresh, and versatile tart. Tart's made with lemons and blueberries. You might not have blueberries in your backyard, but you can definitely get them at your farmer's market. Here we go. So Cecily, why don't you start with separating the eggs, okay? So you work on that. And Parker, your crust is really easy to make. All we're going to do is put the ingredients in, the water and the oil and the flour, the sugar and the salt, and we're going to microwave it. All right. And then what you'll need to do is stir those up, and then we're going to strain them through the strainer. Next we need to pour in the sugar, right? Let's see how that looks. Let's put the lemon juice in and you grab the sugar too. And we'll get that in there too. And then start stirring it up.
The next step is to, first you have to make sure that all the butter is melted
Yep.
completely through. It's about, going to add about a cup of flour, and we're going to stir it in.
Just the flour will absorb the butter. It will turn into a dough. And you don't have to do that cutting in that you usually have to do with when the butter's really cold. All right. Now don't stop stirring. That's one of the keys to having a really fine curd, is to not stop stirring. I know it's sort of boring, but you'll be really happy when you taste it. Now be sure it comes all the way up the sides so that we get a nice little ridge on there. Yeah, bake at 400 for 15 minutes. All right, so it looks like we've got it coating the back of the spoon, so I'm going to take it off the heat and we'll start adding the butter. So this is what gives the smooth finish to lemon curd, is the butter. Here's the zest. This will give it, heighten the lemon flavor just a little bit. Okay. All right, that looks good. You let it cool and then it'll be ready to go into the shell. Okay, good. All right, so here's the finished crust that you did, Parker. It looks beautiful. It really came out good, didn't it? All right, and then the finish is to spread the cooled lemon curd in there, just big dollops onto there, and then you'll spread it out. And then we're going to cover it with blueberries. This is a great way to start out with kids in the kitchen, with something that's really very doable and doesn't require a lot of time, that everybody in the family will really enjoy.
Talk about a show. We've been to Indiana to the National FFA Convention. I'm also inspired by the work that Messina Wildlife Management and BioBase are doing to make our lives better. Now, any of the information in today's show that you might be interested in can be found on my website, pallensmith.com. Until next time, from the garden, I'm Alan Smith.
In this garden I dream of a bed of flowers. Bluebirds sing of the beauty all around us. And every time the sun comes out, I can't help but smile. Oh, no, I can't help but smile.